All right, so 9.0, we call this. This is a review of radicals that is going to be very necessary for this unit. So again, we need to have this simplified, basically. So we don't want any perfect square numbers in this radical, underneath radical. So if you use the card on your desk or the notes, you want to find the biggest perfect square number that goes into each of these. So for 50, again, working backwards, 25 is the best one. It's the only one for this one, but 25. So it's technically the square root of 25 times square root of 2. I always put the perfect square first because that's the one we're going to simplify. And the square root of 25 is simply 5, and that means we have 5 radical 2. All right? Now for this one, number 2, we look backwards. We find the biggest, and you might need to use a calculator. If your times tables aren't that great, you might need to, type a few in the calculator. 45 divided by 36, 45 divided by 25, divided by 16, divided by, oh, it's 9. And that is a little bit of work, but it's not hard work, and it doesn't take very long with the calculator. So this would simplify to 3 radical 5. Now, a very common mistake we see, and I'll just get this out of the way now, I'm sure I talked about in the notes, is people doing this. 45, and then doing radical 9, radical 5, and then saying radical 3. Nope, it's not. The square root of 9 is 3. Okay, so make sure you're not doing that. Don't keep the radical going. When you simplify it, it's done. The radical is gone. But it does stay with the 5. Also, another common mistake is you'll have this second layer, and then people might write this, 5 radical 3. All right, they kind of get it backwards. And they still take the square root of 9 and get 3, but they leave it under the radical, and then they take the radical away from the 5. So I've never really understood the logic, but I do see it happen quite a bit. So make sure you're not making that mistake either. The square root of 9 becomes 3 outside the radical, and the radical 5 stays inside. All right, 20. That's going to be 4 and 5. Again, the 4 simplifies to 2 radical 5. 32. Now this is one where you can make a mistake. Not a mistake, it just takes longer. If you did 4 times 8, that's not wrong, but you're creating more work for yourself because this 8 still has a 4 and a 2 inside of it. So let's not do that, and let's just start off with the 4 times 4, 16 times 2. Always find the biggest number. That's why I say start from the right and work backwards. So the square root of 16 is 4, so 4 radical 2. This is going to be 9 and 2. If you don't put the radical, once you get comfortable, that's fine. I don't when I'm doing it myself. But until you're really good at this, make sure you keep it so you remember to keep that 2 underneath. And the 9 comes out as a 3. All right. This one is... if you think about it, you think, oh, 4. 4 goes into 8. And that is true. 4 times 20, but then that 20 is going to have a 4 in it also, 4 times 5. And if you see those 2 4s again, that means 16 times that 5. So again, you could have done 80 to 4 times 20, but then this would have been 4 times 5. There's that 16, and there's that 5. So you simply, in one step, end up with 4 times 5. It's not that it would be wrong. It just creates more work for yourself. Now, pay attention. On this one, we have a number outside waiting to get multiplied. This is multiplication. If you need to remind yourself with a big old dot there, okay? Otherwise, bring this negative 2 down here to remind yourself to multiply by whatever. Now, this is a simple one because 16, square root of 16 is just 4. So that's going to be negative 2 times the 4 that comes out, which is negative 8. Now this one's a little harder because this one is not a perfect square, so we're going to have to do 2 things here. We're going to have the 9 and the 2, square root of 9, square root of 2. The square root of 9 comes out as a 3, so I want to put that in parentheses to remind myself again to multiply by that negative 4, and then the radical 2 stays under the radical, so that's negative 12 radical 2. We've done 20 before, that's 4 and 5. Don't forget to bring this down. So square root of 4 is 2. Radical 5 stays under. That's going to give us negative 8 radical 5. 16 and 2. Bring this down to negative 5. That's going to become 4. That stays radical 2. Negative 20 radical 2. Perfect square here, so that's just negative 5 times 8. Negative 40. This one is going to be 9 and 5. Negative 2 comes down. That's going to be 3 radical 5, which gives us negative 6 radical 5. This one, 16 and 3. 3 comes down, times the 4 that comes from the 16, radical 5, so that's 12 radical 5. This one is just 6, perfect square. 3 on the outside, that's 18. All right, number 15, 9 and 3. This comes down, negative 4, times the 3, times the radical 3, so that's negative 12 radical 3. We've done this before, that's 16 and 5. Bring this 3 down, times the 4, which was square root of 16, radical 5, so that's 12 radical 5. Again, perfect square, so it's negative 2 times 6, which is negative 12. 4 and 3, bring the 2 down, times the 2, times radical 3, that gives us 4 radical 3. Now, we can't have a radical on the bottom, so we do what's called rationalizing. We multiply by the square root of 3, because we want 2 3's, because remember, that's a little 2 out here. Okay? So on the top, that gives me 2 radical 3. On the bottom, that just becomes 3. And don't forget the negative out here. You can put it outside or you can put it with the top number. Doesn't really matter. And always check and see if these will reduce. They don't. Here, radical 2, radical 2. I don't know why I did a double radical here. So that's radical 10. And then 2 on the outside. Remember, you cannot simplify radical 10 2 because one's an inside number, one's an outside number. Okay, this becomes radical 12, radical 12. That's going to be radical 96, and just 12. Now, this is going to break up, though. Okay, so you need to find the perfect square number that goes into 96. And I'll just give you a hint. 16 is a very popular number to use, so you might want to have these written down, the multiples of 16, 16, 32, 48, so forth. Okay, so that's 16 and 6. So on the top, we're going to get 4 radical 6 over 12, and notice that will reduce. 4 goes into 12 3 times. So radical 6 on the top and 3 on the bottom. Rationalize with radical 3. So that's going to be radical 12, but if you simplify this first to just say, hey, that's just 2, it'll make your life easier. It'll save you a step. So we end up with 2 radical 3 over 3. Now again, you could have ended up with radical 12 over 3, and then you just have to break this up into 4 and 3, and you can see how we would end up with this same answer. So do what's best for you. If you can simplify, try to always simplify, okay? Like here on number 23, I recommend breaking this down first. Now we've already done radical 20, so that's going to be 4 and 5, right? So this is going to be 2 radical 5 over radical 15. It just gives you smaller numbers to work with. So when I rationalize this 15, I have smaller numbers. Okay, so on the top, 15 times 5 is going to give me 75. So I'm going to have 2 radical 75 over 15. But this breaks down to 25 and 3. All right. Square root of 25 is 5 times that 2, which will give me 10 radical 3 over 15. But 5 goes into both those numbers 2 times and 3 times, and the radical 3 just stays. right? 24, again, rationalizing. So that's going to give me 5 radical 15 over 5. Those cancel. I'm left with just radical 15. All right, here, radical 3, radical 3. We don't mess with that 5. We don't multiply by 5 radical 3. That 5 is okay. So on the top, we end up with 3 radical 3. On the bottom, we end up with 5 times 3, which is 15. But again, 3 goes into 15 5 times, so radical 3 over 5. Here, radical 5, radical 5. So that's going to give me 5 radical 15 over 4 times 5. And really, I can just write it like this. Those cancel. Radical 15 over 4, and I am done. And that's it.